when I finished that book, I said, no more. Geez, I got so tired of drawing those diagrams. Because I do all these by hand. You know, I have the table reproduced, but then I draw in the balls and I paste on the arm and draw the lines.
Do you do that like in Photoshop? Or
no, all by hand. I think it looks better.
I think it looks fantastic, but I always thought you had a hired professional to do that.
No, I hired a professional to draw the tables.
Right.
And to
because the geometry never has
to draw this figure. He stood on top of a stepladder and shot down at me to get a picture of me, and then he drew this.
Did he turn it into an illustration?
Yeah. So then he took that photograph and drew this figure, and then I reproduced it 1,000 times. And then I also, in this later book, I paste on these patterns on my shirt. And if it's a real hard shot, I roll up my sleeve. Back here frozen on the cushion, opposite this diamond. If you can make a spot shot from this position, you're doing very well. There it is. My first video kind of blew the field away because I was really lucky because I knew a guy in the movie business, and he wanted to show what his company could do in video. He was making movies.
Right.
And so I just happened to be talking to him. I said, you know, there's no video worth a damn on how to play pool, and that's a huge field. It's sort of underground. Nobody realizes how big that industry is. Well, there's a lot of videos out there that are pretty poor technically. I mean, for the cinematography, they're just done in somebody's basement and live, and I had the advantage of having a crew of 14 on a Hollywood soundstage. And I had a script girl, and I had idiot cards being held up, and it was terrific. When I showed up for the shooting, I was just astounded what the money they had spent. They spent over $100,000 for the first 2 tapes, and that blew everybody else out of the water for color and editing and all that. So I was really lucky, and those tapes still sell pretty well.
Oh, they still hold up. And you had that little pool table, I think, where you would do
that. That was terrific. That was a magnetic. They had a magnetic sheet, and then they put real cloth on it, and they put rails, and they got a little pool game from a Sears or somewhere, and they cut the balls in half and put a little magnet behind so that I could stick them on there and move them around. Say a 9-ball. Here's just one example. Let's say you had the 7 there and the 8 there, and for one reason or another, instead of trying to run out, you see an opportunity to lay down a perfect safety. Here's the idea. You want to bank the 7 3 rails over to this side of the 8 and leave the cue ball behind. Then after it was over, I thought, geez, I'd like to have that board as a terrific teaching tool. Yeah. But it had disappeared. Some crew member took it. It was right after World War II that sport pages quit covering pool. But during World War II and before, that was always on the sport page, who won the latest big tournament, and everybody knew Mosconi and Willie Hoppy, and there'd be newsreels in the theaters, and they'd show clips of pool and billiard tournaments.
Meet Karis challenger and world's pocket billiard champ Willie Mosconi join in some special cue artistry as their cross-country match ends in Chicago. Karis demonstrates some Chinese billiards and some skillful sleight of hand. Even a champ can miss in this game, but he soon finds the combination. Mosconi masses out of a tight spot, the grandfather of all masses, and zingo! If you find yourself behind the 8-ball, just follow Jimmy's example and brush your troubles away. Mosconi's 13-ball billiard shot is a dilly.
After World War II, with the rise of professional basketball, professional football, and hockey and everything else, there was no more room for a pool. Back before World War II, there were two sports, baseball and pool, and billiards. And in one case, an all-star shortstop for the Cubs won the World Pool Tournament. All of those athletes played pool. Not anymore. I don't know if anybody's bothered taking a big survey anymore, but at one point, like 20 years ago, there was far more tables in homes than in billiard rooms. And then the bar scene more or less exploded. Almost every bar has a table. I don't enjoy playing in bars because the table's too small, and I don't like the atmosphere, too noisy. In the billiard tournaments, it's more like putting and professional golf, where everybody just, you know. Whereas in a bar, it's real noisy. I remember watching a national bar league tournament once for half a day, and a team was playing. It was one of these scenes where there's about 50 tables set up in a big auditorium, and one team said, you know, it's too quiet in here, so they brought in a jukebox and put it right next to their table, so they felt more comfortable. Final of Billiards Digest. You look over here and they're pretty thick, but you look at the new ones and they're really thin. They're just not as many people are advertising in the publications. This slump we're in now is different, and it's because of technology, and I don't know. It's not an easy game to learn, and not many people, more people live in apartments than was the case 100 years ago. So there's not room for a table. I'm not really very optimistic about the future of the game. You know, it used to be every town, no matter how small, would have a pool room. If there was only 500 people, then the pool table would be in the barber shop. You know, now there's a lot of towns with no pool hall. And the game I like best, three cushion, that's even more obscure now. It's hard to find a table. That's why we're having this little regional tournament. People come from hundreds of miles away because there's so few places to play. That was the old school of keeping everything to yourself. In Europe, it's utterly different because a lot of well, maybe I shouldn't say that. I'm more familiar with the billiard scene, but in Europe there's a lot of clubs. People play in billiard and pool clubs. They don't play in public rooms. So in a club you're helping each other because as a team you play other clubs, and so here you try to stab the other person in the back. You're not going to tell him anything because he might use that to beat you out of $10. So it's much different in Europe. I prefer that. I don't admire the hustlers. Hustling where gambling is okay, but hustling where you hide your skill in order to rob the other guy, you might as well break into his home, in my opinion, and I don't see why people are so fascinated by hustlers. It's like being fascinating by people who break into homes. And the hustling stories are unbelievable. I don't enjoy reading books about hustlers and their exploits because you don't know how much of it is true. And I've lost a lot of skill, I noticed, since I've gotten so old. In fact, yesterday was my 84th birthday, so I'm lucky to still be vertical. never a great pool player. I think the thing I'm proudest of is when I was 78, I ran 78 in straight pool and 14 in three cushion. I was pretty good there in my 50s and 60s. I won quite a few tournaments in California, and I won the national senior tournament and the national amateur tournament in three cushions. So I was pretty competitive, but there's always a few guys better than me in this country. Internationally, the three cushion players are just unbelievable. There's no American that can stand up to them. Well, it's pretty obscure, but it's being kept alive by Koreans and Mexicans who prefer that game. So, like in Houston, there's a big new, I guess it's a Korean room with like 10 big billiard tables. I used to have a billiard table here, but I brought in a pool table because it's a little more sociable. Because any guest we have wouldn't know how to play billiards, but they might want to play pool. My wife and I went over to Spain for a few months a long time ago, and I won that trophy over there. I always say that's the biggest trophy I ever won, and this is the smallest, which is actually from a box of Cracker Jack. A three cushion tournament, and that was the poster, and all of the participants signed it and they mailed it to me. This is 20 times, or he's won 100 tournaments. This is, we both got the Hall of Fame award at the same time, which was kind of ridiculous because he deserved all of the attention for what he had accomplished. And that's a painting by my wife. She calls it Long Shot. Famous artists like Van Gogh and Degas and all those people, all of them have a billiard painting because that was the pastime 100, 200 years ago. Van Gogh and Degas have painted the same billiard table. This was a corny movie, in my opinion.
Oh, the Color of Money.
Color of Money. I mean, unbelievable that it was supposed to be 25 years after The Hustler, and in the meantime, Paul Newman was running a pool hall and didn't know that the game had changed from straight pool to 9-ball.
Did you like the movie Baltimore Bullet?
You know, when I lived in California, there were two guys defected from Egypt and came over and lived in California, and they were both billiard players, and I played with both of them. Nabi Yusri and Khalil Diab, and they told me that they used to play with Sharif all the time in Cairo, and they used to beat him so unmercifully he gave up the game and went into acting. Well, when I was down on the site of Baltimore Bullet, I said to the publicist for the movie company, I want to interview Sharif. And he said, well, you and everybody else, so he's completely booked. Sorry. So I happened to be standing there on the set when he arrived. He had a kind of a cape on. He had two burly bodyguards on each side. And as he walked by, I said, I bring you greetings from Nabi Yusri and Khalil Diab. And he stopped and he turned and said, how do you know those guys? And so then he came over. I got my interview.
Oh, wow.
I like the slapstick type of stuff like this. There's a guy getting hit right in the eye with a ball. Here's the Willie Mosconi card collection. All pictures of Mosconi.
When did you start playing pool?
Well, my father had a pool table in the basement when I was about 10, 12 maybe. And I got hooked on the game because one time the meter reader came into our basement and I beat him out of 85 cents. And I thought, there's money to be made here. Mecca cigarette cards. These are, I think, around 1907. And here's another series, these little ones. Welker Cochran, who was world three-cushion champion from Iowa. He was from a little town in western Iowa called Manson. It's over by Fort Dodge. I was over there one time and I went into the library, and the librarian, who had been there for 30 years, had never heard of the only significant person who ever came from that town. So I helped her set up a little tribute to Cochran on one shelf. In the McGurty book, I don't know if you remember it that well, but that was the first time that anybody had criticized Fats. McGurty said there's always been at least 50 players who would swim a river of to play Fats for money. And when that book came out, at that time the newspapers were all over Fats. He was a great interview. He was outrageous and he was funny. And so he got toward the end he believed his own bullshit thing. I think he really thought he was a great player. He was a decent player. So I was at a tournament once and Fats was sort of the guest of honor. They had an intermission where he'd take little girls down from the audience and let them beat him. That was charming. And then he'd give them a pin that said, "I beat Minnesota Fats." And so then he started answering questions, and I was up in the bleachers. And somebody said, "Did you know Danny McGurty?" He said, "Danny McGurty couldn't beat Mickey Mouse, and yet some idiot wrote a book about him." And the owner of the joint says, "Yeah, and there he is sitting right up." So Fats came over to below where I was sitting in the bleachers and started yammering at me, saying, he said, "I feel like digging McGurty up and burying that book with him." And I said, "Well, Fats, I'm honored that you read it." And then I thought, I better keep my mouth shut because it's not my show. So I let him run on for a while, but that was my encounter with Fats.
So are you all done writing pool books?
I don't think I'll write another pool book, but the reason I wrote so many is that they kept selling, and the publisher would say, "Well, what else can you do?" So two of them were mainly collections of articles from Billiards Digest. I would just, after 5 years of writing a monthly column, I'd have enough for a book with a little padding. And then the last one, the complete book, that was original, but I said at the beginning, you can't be a complete book of pool shots because it's infinite.
Good luck, good practicing, and good shooting. I'm Bob Byrne. I'm saying goodbye.